Hi, my name is Jazzy, and normally I like to talk about movies, but today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So recently alright, well, you got my microphone. Okay. So I wanted to talk about something recently that I thought was worth discussing. I'm going to try to explain the situation as best as I can. So recently a YouTube creator decided to go after another YouTube creator. Now, I don't want to say the YouTube creator's name in question because she likes to accuse people who use her name as doing it for money or for clout. And even though I'm not monetized, I'm not even close to being monetized right now, I still don't feel comfortable using her name just because I just never want someone to ever accuse me or ever say, well, this is why you have more views or this is why you have more subscribers is because you're talking about her, which just proves that you're using her name to get views. Even though I don't agree with that, but still, I just don't want to use their names. Okay. We're going to refer to this YouTube creator as Tabby Bana. I know, I didn't put a lot of effort into that name, and I don't care. Anyway, so Tabby decided to go after another YouTube creator named Rachel Oates. So Rachel Oates is a YouTube creator that often talks about certain topics such as feminism, religion, although I think she's most well known for covering different poetry books, especially ones made by certain celebrities or creators. She's covered different poetry books, and her most well-known ones covering Tabby's poetry book, breaking down she made at least 3 or 4 videos breaking down different poems from Tabby's first book. And then later she made another video discussing Tabby's second book because Tabby actually personally sent her a copy of her second book, but we'll get to that later. Rachel's reviews were definitely not favorable. Actually, her video specifically said that the poetry was bad in the title. However, when you actually watch the videos in questions, she really gives a lot of helpful and constructive criticism about the book. She breaks down each poem, says what she likes about it, sometimes, although more often than not, she talks about what she didn't like about it. And there are several times where she compares the poem to another poem of a similar style and kind of shows why it worked in this style but didn't work in this style. And they're very educational. You can learn a lot about poetry by watching those videos, which I think was what her intention was. Yes, she probably could have made the same points with a different poetry book, but I can understand why she used Tabby's book because, to be honest, I would agree that it's not the best collection of poetry I've ever seen. And I wouldn't call myself a poetry expert, but I've definitely dabbled in it. I used to write a lot when I was in high school, and I was during my angsty teen phase. And I would not call any of the poems I wrote back then good in any way. I mean, I'm sure there's some elements of it that are good, but for the most part, I would definitely not publish any of those. and But I would definitely not publish any of my past poems. Anyway, so as I was saying, Rachel definitely did not like the poems. She explained why she thought they were bad, although I would say her biggest criticism that was pretty consistent throughout all the videos was that she thought that Tabby's poetry was lazy, and I can see why. If you look through a lot of the poems, you do notice a lot of similar problems. They don't seem fully fleshed out. A lot of them are very surface level. They do touch upon interesting ideas, but they don't really go beyond the fact that they're interesting ideas. Anyway, Tabby did not like this, and despite the fact that Rachel's last review of her book was about 5 or 6 months ago, she decided to recently start attacking Rachel on social media, whether it was Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, basically saying that Rachel was, let me see, what words did she use to describe Rachel? Narcissistic, sick, twisted, bitch, abusive, bitch again, greedy, once again bitch. What else did she say? Unintelligent, not an artist, bitch again, etc., etc. I think you get the point. Anyway, so not only did she attack Rachel. She specifically tagged her in several of her stories talking about her. So, and to the point where Rachel did respond and told her this was attention-seeking behavior and asked her to leave her out of it, and understood that she might be going through something, but to please leave her alone, which Tabby didn't like either, and she especially didn't like the fact that Rachel blocked her and continued on with her tirade. One thing that kind of came up during her tirade was the fact that she called Rachel not an artist, that she said that she does accept criticism, but only from intelligent, smart people who understand art. And she believes that Rachel doesn't understand art and is not intelligent. And she said that she has no accomplishments that indicate in any way that she understands art. Ultimately, this did result in Rachel getting her Instagram account suspended because a lot of Tabby's fans decided to false flag her account, despite the fact that Tabby was the one who was definitely harassing her. But in Tabby's mind, she felt she was standing up for herself because she felt that Rachel was harassing her because she had made multiple videos about her work. And suspiciously left out the fact that she actually sent Rachel a copy of her book with the intention of getting it reviewed. So yeah, the whole situation was just disgusting, just really, really horrible to see. Honestly, it just made my blood boil for so many reasons. A lot of it just has to do with the fact, just the fact that she was attacking Rachel in the first place, who, if you watch any of her videos, seems like the sweetest person ever. And definitely sounds intelligent anytime you watch her videos. She sounds like she knows what she's talking about. And I just have to say, she's also British. Kind of hard for a British person to sound stupid. Just saying. Anyway, another thing that was also really interesting, I guess, to say the least, was the fact that she decided to specifically attack Rachel for covering her books and giving them unfavorable reviews, despite the fact that many other creators had also reviewed her books and were a lot meaner about their reviews. Many of them were honestly, and they would admit this, were just taking the piss out of her poetry. Okay. Whereas with Rachel, while there were times where she might have been a little snarky, she was very diplomatic and very kind during her reviews. In fact, in her first video, she specifically said that if you like Tabby's poetry, that's fine. She specifically said that art is subjective, and if you like a poem, that's great. You don't have to. She's not trying to say that if you like Tabby's poetry, you're dumb and don't know what you're talking about. She's explained the whole point of her reviews to explain why she personally thought the poetry was bad. And there were a lot of moments where she complimented Tabby and said some favorable things about her poetry. She gave credit when credit was due throughout when it was necessary. Not only that, she did say that Tabby has potential, she has talent, and I agree with her. I do think that in some of the poems that I've seen, there are some interesting ideas. There are relatable ideas. However, just because they are interesting or relatable doesn't make them good. It's all in the execution.
Recess is a poem by Gabby that I think actually has a bit of potential, or had a bit of potential before she published it, I don't know. It kind of shows her actually trying to have a little bit of fun with language, I think, and you don't see that very often in the book. This collection of poems from her is very self-indulgent. She takes herself too seriously throughout it, constantly. Recess, on the other hand, is one poem where I actually feel like she was trying to have a little bit of fun with language and poetry and form and so on. It takes a cliched children's nursery rhyme and tries to subvert it. It's a shame that it kind of ends up being a little bit angsty and juvenile, but honestly, it's not the worst one in her collection, not by a long way.
Anyway, since then, Tabby has moved on to other people who decided to say their piece about her, but I'm not really going to focus on that. I mainly just wanted to focus on the idea of criticism in art, because, once again, a lot of Tabby's points about why she felt she was defending herself, or why she felt that she didn't need to listen to Rachel or really think of her criticism as constructive, was because she felt that Rachel wasn't a real artist, and because in her mind she's never had any accomplishments, so therefore she doesn't have to listen to her. And to be fair, there's a point. Yeah, she definitely doesn't have to listen to Rachel if she doesn't want to. She doesn't have to take her criticism. She doesn't have to take it to heart. She doesn't even have to think it's valid if she doesn't want to. I will say creating art is definitely a hard thing to do, especially when you're creating something personal. When you're putting your heart out there, it's a very personal experience. And honestly, anyone who's willing to put their art out there for the world to see is brave. I do admire that. I admire anyone who's willing to produce something and put it out for the world to see. But another part of that is accepting that not everyone's going to like it. Everyone has different tastes. Everyone has different measurements of what they consider good or bad. And just because a person decides to produce a video or write an article or whatever saying why they thought your art wasn't good is not a personal attack, and it's not harassment. And there's this stereotype about critics that were, and yes, I am including myself as this because I do review films, but there is definitely this stereotype that we're just mean, or we're just nitpicky, or we're just here to crap on everything or crap on other people's hard work. And while that is true for maybe some critics, there are some critics out there who really just honestly just want to complain about everything or just be as nitpicky as possible, kind of looking at you, CinemaSins. But there are also other critics that basically the reason why they get into it is because they want to talk about film, or they want to talk about poetry, or they want to talk about TV or books in general. They want to talk about it, and they want to express their opinions to see if maybe there are other people out there who share those same opinions, or to see if other people disagree with them, and see what other people have to say. That is why people critique. It's also a form of media analysis. For me, I enjoy discussing different aspects of film, for example. I like talking about what I thought worked, whether or not the director or screenwriter successfully executed their idea or theme in the movie. I enjoy discussing that. I like talking about whether or not I thought a film was able to move me, or whether I thought the movie executed a great point. That's why I started this channel. And I can tell just by watching Rachel's videos that that's why she decided to start talking about books. She wanted to talk about stuff that moved her, or stuff that she thought maybe could have been better. You can tell just watching any of her videos that she loves poetry, and she knows what she's talking about.
To me, poetry at its basic level is art where the medium is language. The best art understands the medium and then uses it in new creative ways to express something important to the artist. So for a poem to be good, the poet needs to have understood the techniques and theory that came before it, and then somehow try to apply it in a new, inventive way. Poetry is different from other types of writing for a number of reasons. You need a certain set of skills when you're writing an essay, a business plan, fiction, short stories, novels, a newspaper article. Poetry, more than any other style of writing, is as much about how you say something as what you're saying. In good poetry, everything is deliberate and with meaning. The language used, the spelling, punctuation, and syntax, the rhyme, the rhythm, the pacing, the pauses, how are the words arranged on the page, how does the poem look on the page, how does it sound when you read it aloud.
This leads me to another discussion about whether or not you should listen to someone's criticism, and it depends. I would just say that Tabby's statement that Rachel doesn't know what she's talking about because she doesn't have any accomplishments is just laughable to me, especially since Tabby's only accomplishment, aside from, of course, being able to publish 2 books, which, yeah, it's impressive, although at the same time she is also a very well-known YouTuber, and a lot of YouTubers have books of their own. It's very easy for them to be able to, or at the very least, it's easier for them to be able to go to a book company or even be approached by a book company to write a book versus someone like me, for example. If I decided to go to a book company and try to get a book published, it would be a very different process. Versus Tabby, she has some credibility because she has an audience. Because she has an audience, a built-in audience, it's easier for a book company to see, okay, yeah, she's going to make money off. She's going to be able to make us money. And I'm not trying to shade her talent or her artistic credibility. I'm just saying that's just kind of a fact. And aside from that, her other accomplishment is the fact that she was on the New York Times bestseller list, which once again, yeah, that's pretty impressive. But at the same time, when you have a built-in audience who is most likely going to buy whatever you produce, it becomes a little less as impressive. I'm pretty sure all the Twilight books have been on the bestseller list at one point, and I partially contributed to that because I did buy some of those books. That way, although even that's more of an accomplishment in a sense, because at least for the first book, considering Stephanie Meyer was a first-time published writer. So in a lot of ways, that is more impressive than someone who, once again, has an audience, whether they are a YouTuber or a musician or an actor or a comedian. They're just going to have an easier time selling those books. It also doesn't help that with, I believe, her first and second book, she had multiple different versions of the books. So if her fans wanted to get all those versions, they would have to buy multiple of them. So that did probably boost the numbers a little bit. Just saying. So I'm just saying, to say that just because Rachel has never, maybe, for example, worked with a well-known book company, has never gotten on the bestsellers list, or has never gotten a Pulitzer Prize, for example, doesn't mean she's not credible. If we only valued people who got accomplishments like that, then no one could be a critic. So, once again, if you watch any of Rachel's videos, not just about Tabby's books, but about other YouTuber books or other poetry books in general, or even any of her videos that discuss poetry, it's very obvious that she knows what she's talking about. She uses a lot of the same verbiage that's used in academic circles, and that's probably because she has studied poetry in school. Now, while her degree is not specifically in poetry or English literature at all, she has taken literary courses and done very well in them, in fact. But once again, just because I'm not trying to say that in order for you to be a credible person when it comes to discussing things like poetry, for example, you have to go to university. I'm not saying that at all, because I do understand that not everyone has the opportunity to go to a university or any type of higher learning, since universities are very expensive. However, there are also ways to educate yourself when it comes to, for example, poetry. There are workshops you can take. There are classes you can take. Some colleges offer classes specifically on poetry, and you don't necessarily have to sign up for a whole semester. You can just take maybe one class. There are also videos online to discuss poetry. There are articles. There's even services like Skillshare, not sponsored, by the way. But there are a lot of resources you can use to educate yourself on poetry and how to write poetry. And that's partially why Rachel did her series, is to educate people about poetry. In her videos, she discusses a lot of common mistakes that a lot of first-time poets make. And to be honest, I don't know how long Tabby has been working on poetry. I do know that she's a songwriter. She's made a lot of songs, which, to be honest, I have a little trouble understanding why her songwriting seems to be a lot better versus her poetry. Because I have heard a few of her songs, and the lyrics are pretty good, I would say. Like, her songs sound nice. Her videos were not intended just to crap all over Tabby's work. Some people might say that, once again, art is subjective, which, once again, Rachel did say in her videos. However, she also said in one video where her audience also pointed out that while art is subjective, theory isn't.
There were some great comments on my last video, actually, saying something along the lines of, like, whether you like poetry might be subjective, but the theory behind it isn't, or something like that. I'll see if I can find some of the comments and put them on screen now. But I was like, yes, great point. You guys are smart. I'm so glad you're here.
And that's an excellent point, because, yes, you might like for example, if I'm talking about film, I might like a movie, or you might like a movie that is often considered bad, but you might like the movie because of how it made you feel or how you related to it, but others might find it bad because they felt that either they might have other reasons why they don't like it, whether it's because maybe they thought the story structure wasn't good, maybe they felt that the that they felt certain plots were unresolved. Maybe they felt that the cinematography wasn't that great, or they didn't like the set design. There are a lot of reasons why a person might not technically like a film, but they might even enjoy certain themes of the movie, but just not the movie as a whole, because all of the other things kind of prevented them from liking it. And the same can be said for poetry. You might like that the poem is about something you relate to, like depression or crying in your car, but the execution might be so bad that it kind of takes you out of it. And then other people might not notice that the execution was that great, but they like it anyway, and that's fine. I just hate the idea that the stereotype that critics are these mean bullies that want to pick on artists, and just because they can't create art themselves. Because just because one person's good at analyzing media doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. Just because, for example, they can't make art themselves. Because one person may be better at knowing what a good poem looks like, and another person would rather write poetry, doesn't mean that one is more intelligent than the other. If that makes sense. Basically, because the situation somewhat reminds me of when Roger Ebert famously told Rob Schneider that his movie sucks. And it kind of resulted in a back and forth between the two until eventually they squashed their beef. Now, Roger Ebert was a well-known movie critic that most people respected. I don't agree with everything he's ever said when it comes to certain movies, but I do respect how he was able to state his opinions and write them so eloquently, or say them so eloquently at the movies. That's what I admire about him, even if, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with everything he's ever said about certain movies. And he famously did work on a few movies, except they weren't really regarded as good, at least not in the way that most people would think they are. He famously wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which is a movie that has mixed reception. I personally find it an interesting movie, and also, to be fair, he did only co-write it. He didn't write it all by himself. But he was someone who some people might say was probably better at critiquing art than maybe making art, and that's okay. But to get back about the whole Roger Ebert and Rob Schneider situation, is that despite the fact that Rob Schneider was definitely a little annoyed or a little miffed about the whole situation, since Roger Ebert did also title his collection of bad reviews as Your Movie Sucks. But even despite that, Rob Schneider could definitely tell that Roger Ebert wasn't the type of critic that wanted movies to fail. He had high hopes for every movie he saw. He wanted them to be good. He didn't want a movie to be bad. He wanted to enjoy it and wanted to like it. And if Rob Schneider can see that, I just don't understand how Tabby can't. And also related to that, I just thought this was a nice story. When Roger Ebert was diagnosed with cancer, Rob Schneider actually sent him a bouquet of flowers to his house, just to kind of show support for the whole situation. And Roger Ebert said that while Rob Schneider probably doesn't make great movies, he seems like a nice person. And I always like that story, and I wish that more people would instead of taking critique as a personal attack, would just maybe evaluate that. And he didn't consider Roger Ebert a bully. He had some respect for him. I also wanted to bring up how Tabby tried to discredit Rachel's criticism by pointing out the fact that Rachel self-published a book called Doggolescence, which was a parody of Tabby's original book, and the book was written or co-written by Rachel's dog, Kyra, and the book was written from the perspective of a dog, well, specifically a rescue dog. Now, Tabby said that this was offensive because she felt that she was mocking her, because Tabby said that her book was written from the perspective of an abused child. So she was trivializing the issue by writing that parody. To an extent, I can almost see where she's coming from, and if she had just said, hey, I didn't appreciate you making a parody book about something that meant a lot to me, I would have a lot more sympathy for her. But unfortunately she didn't, so that's why we're talking about it. Anyway, despite that, I still don't find the book to be offensive. I also don't find it to be bullying, or an example of bullying. Now, to be fair, I'm going to be saying that a lot, aren't I? or I probably already have said it a lot. But either way, yes, Tabby's feelings about it are valid. However, if she looked beyond the surface and actually looked at the book, she would see that she's not parroting the elements or the topics of the book. She was parroting the style. Anyway, I don't think just because the book is written from the perspective of a dog means that she's trivializing the experiences of an abused child, especially since her dog is a rescue dog. Not only that, she loves her dog so much, she basically treats her like a daughter. And in the video where she is writing the book with her dog is adorable. It's cute. I just don't see how anyone could watch that and see Rachel as a malicious person, to be honest. It's a little weird to say that. I'm just saying, it's a little weird to think of that as the biggest example of someone mocking you.
Hi, so I'm editing now and I forgot to mention a few things. So, one, Tabby actually described her book as a parody of Shel Silverstein's collection of poetry. So I thought it was just very interesting that all of a sudden she's so against parody books. Another thing is I forgot to mention that parody isn't necessarily something negative. Yes, it can be used to quote unquote mock things or people. However, some of the best parodies in the world were ones made as love letters to certain genres or films in general. For example, Spaceballs by Mel Brooks is considered to be a loving tribute to the Star Wars movies. And while it does make fun of certain elements of Star Wars, you can definitely tell that Mel Brooks was a fan of the series. Now, I'm not trying to say that Doggolescence is a love letter to Gabby's poetry, however, I just don't think it was made with any type of malicious intent. Also, I wanted to mention that according to Rachel, some of the profits for this book have been sent to the Battlesea Dogs and Cats home where she got her dog Kyra from. So, if you do purchase this book, just wanted to let you know that your money does go to help dogs and cats. I bought a copy of the book myself, and if you're interested in purchasing it as well, I will be putting a link in the description.
Also, I would just like to point out that just because a book is about deep things or about dark elements doesn't make it good. For example, there's a movie that comes to mind that deals with a lot of dark elements, such as infidelity, domestic violence, drug use, and spoiler alert, suicide. And that movie is Tommy Wiseau's The Room.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
I think most of us could agree that that is not a good movie. Only enjoyment people have from that movie, honestly, is mocking it. And even despite that, while Tommy Wiseau definitely had some resistance to that, considering he did used to copyright strike reviews that discussed his movie, he's since come around that, and he's pretty much embraced the movie's reputation. Goes to the screenings of the movie, he's willing to talk about the movie. Also pretty supportive of the movie that was made about his movie. And although it took some time, Tommy Wiseau was a lot more receptive to the criticism and his movie's reputation than Tabby's was about her own book. Take that in as you will. Let that marinate with you. That Tommy Wiseau might be a more stable person than Tabby is. Another argument that Tabby tried to make about why she considered Rachel's reviews to be harassment or bullying or whatever is the fact that Rachel made multiple videos about her book. Well, multiple videos about her first book and then the one video about her second book. And I also don't see how that could be considering bullying, harassment, because the reason why she did multiple videos was so that way she could go in depth with each poem that she chose. And not only that, because she's also discussing other poetry, because she does compare each poem to another poem written by someone else, comparing it to a lot of modern writers as well, or at least modern compared to our time right now. So it's not as if she's holding her to very impossible standards. She's holding her to pretty realistic standards. So it makes sense why she would make multiple videos discussing the same book, so she could get her point across. Not only that, she's not the only creator that has made multiple videos about either the same subject or even the same creator. And Lindsay Ellis made several videos talking about Michael Bay and the Transformers franchise. She mainly used it to explain auteur theory. Maggie Mae Fish recently, as recently as a few months ago or several months ago, I don't know. Time is an enigma right now. We're still kind of in quarantine right now. Either way, Maggie Mae Fish made a few videos discussing Zack Snyder and his movies. Now, I really doubt that Michael Bay or Zack Snyder would come out and start accusing Lindsay Ellis or Maggie Mae Fish of bullying them. And if they did, they would look like they would look like complete jokes, although they kind of are jokes in some ways. But I'm just saying, people would probably ask, like, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? You're ruining your reputation. Because coming out against critics, especially critics that aren't giving that bad of criticism, just makes you look bad. It's not a good look to attack critics for stating their opinion, especially if they can back it up in some way. You don't have to agree with every critic. Sometimes you do have to take things with a grain of salt. Sometimes it is very apparent that this reviewer doesn't know what they're talking about. I've read reviews where I didn't agree with that reviewer because I didn't feel that they explained their point well, or I felt they were focusing on things that didn't matter to the overall story. And I'm sure people have probably felt that way about my reviews. There are probably some people out there who watch my reviews, which, to be honest, is very few, and I'm okay with that. I'm slowly building up an audience. It happens. But I'm sure there are people out there who watch my reviews and say, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and that's okay, especially since I've only been at this for a little bit recently. And when I talk about movies, I'm not talking about technical aspects. I'm really just trying to talk. I would say I am applying film theory to my reviews, very lightly though. Because I'm still working on trying to get my point across when I'm discussing movies. And if someone were to say that I didn't know what I was talking about, depending on what they were pointing out, I would either agree with them or disagree with them. If they're attacking my physical appearance or they're attacking my character in any way, that's a different story. I do have a right to defend myself, and Abby has a right to defend herself if she feels that people are attacking her physical appearance or attacking her character. She does have a right to defend herself there. But she is not defending herself when she is attacking a creator for just having the audacity of just not thinking her books are good. Not standing up for yourself. That is just bullying. Another way that Tabby tried to discredit Rachel in her criticism by saying she doesn't know what she's talking about was the fact that Rachel had critiqued Bo Burnham's poetry, Egghead. Tabby basically claimed that Rachel didn't like Bo Burnham, therefore she has bad taste. But if Tabby had actually watched the video, or even watched Rachel's previous video calling Bo Burnham a genius, she would know that Rachel is actually a fan of Bo Burnham. She was just disappointed with his book of poetry. And it's entirely possible to not like something a creator has made, but still liking the creator, or liking the creator's other work. I'm a Tim Burton fan, but that doesn't mean I like every movie he's ever made. Once again, critique is not hate. It is just critique.
I forgot to mention this when I originally recorded. However, another thing that Tabby brought up was how the reason people didn't understand her poetry was because she is neurodivergent, because she recently discovered that she may have ADHD. And she believes that the people who didn't like her poetry didn't like it because they didn't understand it, and they didn't understand it because they are neurotypical. Now, I just don't think that argument holds up, because there are plenty of artists that have been neurodivergent or have suspected to be neurodivergent, and many of them were regarded as talented by neurotypical people. Just because your brain is neurodivergent doesn't mean that neurotypical people aren't capable of understanding or appreciating the talent.
Yeah, so overall, I just felt I had to say something, mainly because this whole thing has been bothering me. I just hate the fact that, one, she specifically targeted a creator who, in my opinion, did nothing wrong, and two, basically is perpetuating the idea that critics don't know what they're talking about, and they're not artists, and they're not intelligent because they don't have the intelligence to create their own art, and they're just big meanies who like to crap on everything, and only real artists have the ability to critique or give advice when it comes to art. I just hate that narrative. I don't like it, and I hate that she's also spewing that out to her very impressionable audience that are very clearly children. Believe me, I've talked to some of them. Very obviously children. This is not to say that children are dumb, though. I just don't want them to have this idea that critics are bullies. I really don't. And not even just for my sake, I think just in general, because it's going to be really harmful later down the line if they decide to create art or decide to do things. I don't want them to think that they are able to attack people just for giving them constructive criticism, or even if they're giving them maybe mean criticism, maybe not responding in this way, because overall it's very unprofessional. If every director or every writer or every actor, for example, were to act like this anytime they received an ounce of criticism, people would not want to work with them anymore, because no one wants to work with someone who can't take criticism. And Tabby cannot take criticism. Her actions have spoken very loudly that she cannot take criticism, and I don't care what she says. She says she can take criticism. Her actions completely contradict that. Anyway, I just needed to rant about that, so I apologize if this video is a little different, if it's unstructured. I will eventually be going back to film reviews, if that's what you came here for. Be sure to comment what you think about the situation, what you think about criticism and art in general. Although, if you leave a negative comment, you're a narcissistic, sick, twisted bitch, and I hate you. Bye.